Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for being here and for sharing your thoughtful presentations with us. I know that abortion is a really divisive issue. It's a divisive issue among Americans. It's a divisive issue among their elected representatives here in the Senate. And I know that members on this committee in particular have very different viewpoints on it. But I really do hope, and quite frankly, I expect, that we should be able to unite around the premise that every baby born alive should be provided with the same standard of care without regard to whether her parents wanted her to be born alive. That should not be a difficult decision. That is analytically and morally distinct from the question of abortion. Now, I have my own views about abortion. I have not made those a secret. But those, quite frankly, are separate from the issues that we're talking about today. We're talking today about a child who was born and born alive following an attempt, albeit an unsuccessful one, to end her life prior to her birth. That is analytically, morally distinct, and it's an appropriate and unfortunately necessary question for us to address. I hope we can unite around the concept that all babies with similar medical conditions deserve to be treated equally, regardless of their sex, regardless of their race, regardless of the economic circumstances of their parents, and regardless of the conditions under which they were born. Now, I understand, and I understand with great sadness that there are some babies who were born with no chance of survival. Where that is the case, doctors and parents should determine the most compassionate palliative care that's appropriate for those infants. However, our laws really ought to err on the side of protecting the right to life of those innocent babies. I'm aware of no other circumstance in the law where we would willfully disregard the humanity of a human being. The most sacred of the obligations, of the duties of not just this government, but any government, is to protect life, liberty, and property. But it's no accident that we list life as the very first one. It's why governments exist, to make sure that we treat each other with dignity and respect, and that we don't treat life casually. Ms. Stanek, I wanted to follow up on a comment you made a moment ago that I think we need to think about a little bit more. You commented that in some circumstances, a doctor performing the abortion and present at the moment that the infant is born alive following a failed abortion attempt might be, I think the words you used were, financially invested in the outcome of death of the baby. Can you explain a little bit what you mean by that?
Well, they were paid to kill the baby before the baby was born. So if the baby survives, it would be considered, and I've read, it's considered a complication if they're born alive. And there's another reason, and that is that sometimes they've diagnosed this baby with having something wrong and encouraged abortion, and sometimes their diagnoses are wrong. And so letting the baby die is also covering up for their mistakes. And I remember one mom who aborted her baby, and he came out alive, which she didn't expect, but also he didn't appear to have a physical defects that she'd been told he was going to have. So she screamed for someone to help her baby, and my nurse friend, ran over to the neonatal department because they weren't prepared to assess and care for this baby at delivery.
They weren't prepared in part because that's not what they do.
No, not in the case of unwanted babies. In the case of wanted babies, they'd have 5 medical personnel there at delivery just to specifically care for that baby and not anything else in the room. So she was so traumatized, my friend ran over and grabbed the neonatologist, and he came rushing back and assessed the baby and said there was nothing he could do to save the baby because the baby had been born too soon, although there was nothing wrong with him. And the mom was so traumatized, she had to be tranquilized, and it was left up to this little guy's grandmother to rock him for the only half hour that he would live outside the womb.
Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Pieriucci, I want to thank you for your work and for what you've told us today. there's one statement from your written testimony that really stuck out to me as encapsulating the heart of the issue that we're here discussing today, which I want to be clear, again, is not abortion itself. It's about what happens when someone fails to kill a baby in an abortion attempt. You said, quote, "There is no ethical reason why this medical standard of care should be abandoned for a subgroup of people because they might be less wanted than others. Wantedness does not determine humanness. Put another way, it would be an abandonment of my medical and ethical duty if I only responded to the needs of some babies and not to others." Now, this disparate treatment of babies, based not on their chances of survival, but on how they're born, and on whether their parents wanted and intended and expected for the child to survive the process of being born, the traumatic process for everyone involved of being born, is what we're trying to prevent. We shouldn't be ignoring the fact that that is not a valid distinction between who should live and who should not. So would a law requiring doctors to meet the same standard of care, to treat infants born alive following a failed abortion in the same manner that they would an infant of the same gestational condition, prevent a physician from making medically sound decisions?
As I read this, what's the law that I saw, this is all about how do we have the privilege to help the baby. It doesn't go farther than that as far as access to anybody else. It is about gaining access to a baby who needs help, and we potentially have the ability to do so.
There are close questions that have to be drawn in the law, tragic choices, as Guido Calabrese used to describe many decisions that have to be made in the law. This is not one of them. If we ever get to the point in our society where we regard it as close, heaven help us all. Thank you.